At Thanksgiving, in the house my late husband built with his own two hands, my daughter stood up in front of 16 people, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Mom, you can eat in the kitchen. The real family sits here." Nobody said a word, not one of them. So I set my plate down easy, and I told her, "You're right, sweetheart. Let me get out of the way." 3 hours later, my phone lit up. It was her husband, and his voice was shaking so bad I could barely make out the words. "The title company called," he said. "The loan fell apart. Adeline, what the hell did you do?" "My name is Adeline Rourke. I'm 70 years old. And for 32 years, I got paid to look at a signature and tell a courtroom whether it was real or a lie. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. Because what that title company had just figured out, I'd known for 2 weeks. I was the one who caught it first. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at my own kitchen table, and I let him talk. And the whole time he was begging. One thought kept turning over slow and quiet in my chest. You sent me to the kitchen. You had no idea you were sending me exactly where I do my best work. Welcome to my channel, where the woman they wave off to the kitchen turns out to be the one holding the pen the whole thing was signed with. Stick around, drop a comment, hit subscribe. This one is worth your time. I promise you. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I am before any of the rest of it lands right. I am not, I'll be the first to admit, an impressive woman to look at. I'm 70. I wear cardigans because I'm cold most of the year now. And I drive a 15-year-old Honda that I have zero intention of replacing because the thing runs like a sewing machine. I say thank you to the girl at the grocery checkout, and I mean it. I keep hard candy in my purse. People take one look at a woman like me and they fill in the rest of the story themselves. Sweet, simple, a little slow, probably. Past her usefulness, definitely. Somebody's harmless old grandmother. My daughter started filling in that story about me a long time ago, and God help me, I let her. Correcting people is exhausting, and I had better things to do with the years I've got left than argue about who I am. But here's what nobody in that dining room knew when they watched me walk out the front door. For 32 years, I was a forensic document examiner. I worked in the crime lab for the county, and my whole job, the entire thing, was telling the difference between the truth and a forgery. Somebody signs a name that isn't theirs. Somebody backdates a will. Somebody traces a signature off a real check onto a fake one. I'm the woman they put on the stand to explain to 12 jurors exactly how she knew. I've testified in more courtrooms than I can count. I've sat 3 feet from men who forged their own dead mother's name onto a deed and watched their face go white when I laid the enlargement up on the screen. You learn things in that work that you never fully put down. And the biggest one is this. A forged signature always betrays itself. It trembles in the exact spot where an honest hand would have glided. A real signature is muscle memory. You've signed your own name so many thousands of times that your hand doesn't think. It just flows, fast and loose and sure. But a forger is concentrating. He's watching the line. And so his pen slows down and shakes right where yours would have flown. That little tremble, that hitch, that hesitation, that's the tell. Once you've spent 3 decades training your eye to catch it, you cannot unsee it. It jumps off the page at you. So when I tell you I knew, in about 3 seconds flat, that a signature was fake, I need you to understand I'm not bragging. It's the same as a piano tuner hearing one flat note in a whole concert. It's just what my ear does now, what my eye does. Hold on to that. It matters more than anything else I'm going to tell you tonight. Now let me tell you about the house, because everything turns on the house. My husband was named Emmett Rourke, and Emmett built that house on Ferncliff Road with his own two hands in the summer of 1981. Him and his cousin, and about 100 cases of the cheapest beer you ever saw. He wasn't a contractor. He sold farm equipment. But that man could build anything, and he decided he was going to build his wife a home instead of buying one. And by God, he did. He framed it in July. He carried me over the threshold in October before the kitchen even had a floor down, both of us laughing. Me telling him he was going to drop me and break my hip before we ever had a chance to grow old. And him saying, not a chance. Addie, I built these arms, same as I built this house. We raised our girl in that house. We buried 45 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases and one hell of a lot of ordinary Tuesdays into those walls. Emmett passed 5 years ago, in the back bedroom, on a gray morning in March, with his hand in mine. And I have kept that house exactly the way you keep a place that still holds the person you loved. His reading glasses are still in the drawer by the good chair. His fountain pen, the one he signed every important thing in our lives with, our marriage license, our daughter's birth certificate, the mortgage the day we paid it off. That pen still sits on the desk in his study where he left it. Remember the pen. We'll come back to the pen. Here is the thing this whole family had quietly, conveniently forgotten. That house is mine, just mine. Emmett left it to me free and clear. No mortgage. We burned that paper together the year he retired. No liens. My name and only my name on the deed. It has been legally, completely, 100% mine for 5 years. But because I'm the one who hosts, because I'm the one up at 4 in the morning on Thanksgiving with the turkey, and I'm the one still scrubbing pans at midnight while everybody else is asleep. The house had somehow stopped feeling like mine to everybody but me. It had turned into the family house, like a park or a public library, something that just exists, that'll always be there, that a certain old woman happens to keep the lights on in. My daughter had started talking about it the way you talk about the weather, like it was just out there, permanent, waiting for her. My daughter's name is Meredith. She's 44, and she's spent the last decade climbing. I don't say that mean. Climbing's in our blood. Emmett and I climbed our whole lives too, just up a shorter ladder than the one Meredith set her sights on. She married a man named Grant Sterling, and the Sterlings have the kind of money that's been sitting in the family so long they've forgotten it ever had to be earned by anybody. Grant's mother, Camille, wears that money like a thermostat she keeps the whole room set to. And somewhere along the line, Meredith decided that to belong up there with people like that, she had to leave down here behind. Down here being me, the cardigans, the old Honda, the mother who spent her career squinting at other people's handwriting under a lamp. She started correcting me at dinners. Little things. Mom, it's not couch, it's sofa. Mom, nobody says icebox anymore. She started introducing me with this little apologetic laugh, like she was warning people ahead of time. This is my mother, she'd say. She's very old-fashioned. When I offered to bring my scalloped potatoes to something, the ones she used to beg me to make when she was a girl, she'd tell me the caterer had it handled, in a voice that meant please. God, do not show up with a casserole dish in front of these people. And I let it all roll off. That's what mothers of climbers learn to do. You tell yourself she's just finding her footing up there. You tell yourself that the day she finally feels safe, the day she stops being scared, somebody's going to smell where she came from. She'll turn around and reach back down for you. I told myself that story for 10 years straight. What I never told her, what I never told a living soul, was that in my own quiet way, I'd already reached up to her as far as I possibly could. After Emmett died, I sat down with a lawyer and I put the whole thing in a trust. The house, the little bit of savings, all of it, to go to Meredith and to her boy when I'm gone. I didn't make a speech about it. I didn't hang it over her head. In my mind, it was simple and it was settled. The house goes to my daughter and my grandson someday, because who else on this earth would it go to? That was just a fact, sitting in a drawer waiting. She didn't know that yet. And you are going to want to keep it in mind, because a man who's drowning doesn't always want to wait for someday. Sometimes a man who's drowning decides he needs a life raft right now, tonight, and he doesn't much care whose name is written on the side of it. There was one person in that whole family who never once made me feel like a piece of furniture. My grandson, Silas. Silas is 17. All elbows and Adam's apple and these big, earnest opinions about everything under the sun. He's the kind of kid who still hugs his grandmother in front of his buddies and hasn't figured out yet that he's supposed to be embarrassed about it. He comes by on Sunday sometimes. Just him, and we do the crossword. And he tells me about some girl at school he can't work up the nerve to talk to. He's the only one who ever asks me to tell the one about your grandpa and the canoe, even though he's heard it 40 times. He likes that I keep Emmett's reading glasses in that drawer. He's the only person in that family, I swear to you, that I can look straight at and see my husband looking right back. When I put that house in the trust, Silas was half the reason it felt right. I pictured him someday, grown, with kids of his own running around on the floors his grandfather laid down by hand. That was the picture I fell asleep to. So hold that picture too. Because he was at that table on Thanksgiving, 17 years old, in a button-down shirt his mother made him wear, sitting way up near the head of the table with the real family, and of every single person in that warm, crowded, ungrateful room. Exactly one of them was about to do the decent thing. Remember that when we get there, and remember that I was watching. It started with an email. That's the part that still gets me. Not a phone call, not a knock at the door, not some dramatic thing. Just a plain little email, the kind you'd delete without reading, sitting in my inbox on an ordinary Tuesday in the middle of November. Now I have to tell you something about myself that will explain why that email was even there. Years ago, back before I retired, our county did a thing that a lot of counties around the country have started doing. The Recorder of Deeds office set up a free alert system. You sign up with your name and your property, and anytime a document gets recorded against that property, a deed, a lien, a mortgage, anything at all, the county shoots you an email letting you know. They started it up precisely because deed fraud had gotten so bad. People were forging quitclaim deeds, recording them, and stealing houses right out from under folks who had no idea until the new owner showed up to change the locks. Most people never sign up for it. Most people don't even know it exists. But I spent 32 years watching exactly this kind of thing cross my desk in the crime lab. I knew the way you know the stove is hot, how easy it is to steal a house with nothing but a pen, a notary who isn't paying attention, and $40 in recording fees. So the day the county rolled that alert system out, I signed up for it before my coffee got cold. Emmett teased me about it. Addie, he said, who in God's name is going to steal this house? It's got a leaky gutter and a possum living under the porch. And I told him, nobody, honey. I just like to know what's mine is still mine. So there I was, that Tuesday in November, coffee in hand, and I open up this email from the Recorder of Deeds office. And the subject line says, a new document has been recorded against my property. I want to walk you through exactly what happened in my chest in that moment, because it wasn't panic. I need you to understand that. A lot of women my age, they'd feel their hearts start hammering. Mine did the opposite. It went slow. It went cold and slow and clear, the way it always did the second before I sat down at the lamp with a question document. 32 years trained something into you that never fully switches off. My whole body just quietly went to work. I clicked the link, and there it was. A quitclaim deed, recorded 11 days earlier, transferring the house on Ferncliff Road, my house, Emmett's house, from Adeline Rourke to a company I had never heard of in my life. And down at the bottom of that deed, in the spot where it said grantor, there was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. I want to be real careful about how I say this next part, because it's the whole hinge of everything. I did not think it might be fake. I did not suspect it. I knew, instantly, the same 3 seconds it would have taken me on the witness stand, because I have signed my own name probably a million times in 70 years. And my hand knows that name the way your feet know the stairs in your own house in the dark. And this thing on the screen, this careful, hesitant, tidy little forgery, was not that. Whoever drew it had done a decent job. To a bank teller, to a county clerk, to anybody who wasn't me, it would have passed clean. The loops were right. The slant was right. But there was a tremble in the downstroke of the a little hitch, a little stall, right in the exact spot where my real hand would have flown through without a thought. An honest hand glides there. This hand had stopped to think. And a signature that stops to think is a signature that's lying to you. I sat there and I looked at my own forged name on a document stealing my own house. And I did not cry, and I did not shake, and I sure as hell did not call anybody in a hurry. I did what I have done my entire professional life. I went and got the truth for myself, first before I said one word to a single soul. The next morning, I drove down to the county building, to the Recorder of Deeds office, a place I have walked into 100 times over the years for 100 different cases. The clerk behind the counter didn't know me from Adam, just some little old lady in a cardigan wanting to pull a record. I asked for the certified copy of the recorded deed and everything filed along with it. And I sat down at one of those scarred wooden tables they've got, and I put on my reading glasses, and I read. And this is where the floor really dropped out. The first thing, the deed had been notarized. There was a notary stamp on it, and a notary signature, swearing that Adeline Rourke had personally appeared before this notary on such and such a date and signed this document of her own free will. And I had done no such thing. I had never met this notary. I had never been in a room with this notary. The name on that stamp was Dale Pruitt. And I sat there and I thought, well, now, this is not one person alone with a pen anymore. This is two. Because a forged signature is one crime, a sad and stupid and lonely crime. But a forged signature with a real notary stamp swearing it happened, that's a conspiracy. That's somebody with an official seal who either got fooled or got paid or just plain didn't give a damn enough to make the woman show up before he stamped it. That notary turned a bad forgery into a document the county was willing to record. Somebody had help. The second thing was worse. And it took me a minute to understand it, because at first it didn't make sense to me at all. The company the house had been signed over to, I'd never heard of it. So I did what I do. I pulled the thread. There are public records for these things, business filings you can look up. And I looked it up right there on the ancient county computer, hunting and pecking with 2 fingers like the old woman they all think I am. And I found it. A little limited liability company, formed only 4 months back. And I found the name of the person who controlled it, the sole member, the only human being with his hand on that company. Grant, my son-in-law. Grant Sterling, not Meredith. Grant, alone. Now I sat back in that hard wooden chair, and I really had to think, because this was not the story I'd been telling myself on the drive over. On the drive over, in the back of my mind, I'd been bracing for something ugly but almost ordinary. I figured, in the worst case. My daughter and her husband had gotten impatient, gotten grabby, decided the old lady was taking too long to die or downsize or get out of the way, and cooked up some scheme to move the house into their names early. A family thing. A greedy, hurtful, but almost understandable family thing. Both of them, together, wanting what they'd already decided was theirs. But that is not what this was. This house had not been signed over to my daughter and her husband. It had been signed over to a company that only Grant controlled. Meredith's name was nowhere on it. Whatever this was, my son-in-law had built it so that when the dust settled, that house belonged to him. Not to them, to him. And then the last thread. I kept pulling, because by now I could feel there was more. The way you can feel there's one more stair in the dark. Why would a man forge a deed to move a paid-off house into a shell company he alone controls? There's really only one reason a man does that. You don't do it to live in the house. You do it to borrow against it. A house that's owned free and clear, with no mortgage on it, is like a fat, untouched savings account just sitting there. If you can get your name on it, or your company's name on it, you can walk into a bank and take a loan out against it, hundreds of thousands of dollars, cash in your pocket, and the house is the collateral. And I'd bet you every dollar I have that's somewhere out there. Grant Sterling had a loan closing scheduled. A man doesn't forge a deed for the fun of it. He forges it because there's money he needs, and he needs it soon. So let me lay out for you exactly where things stood. Legally, the moment I stood up from that table, because this is the part people always get wrong, and I don't want you getting it wrong. A forged deed is worthless. I mean that in the actual legal sense. A signature that isn't real transfers nothing. In the eyes of the law, that deed is a dead letter, void from the very first second. And no judge in Pennsylvania was ever going to make me hand over my house on the strength of a signature I never wrote. So, in one sense, I was never really going to lose the house. I want to be honest with you about that, because I hate stories where the stakes are fake. But here is where it gets dangerous. And here is what had my heart going slow and cold. The minute that loan closed, the minute a bank handed Grant's little company a check and took the house as collateral. Now there's a lender in the picture, a bank that loaned out real money in good faith, that has a lien on my house, that is going to fight like hell to keep that lien even after everybody agrees the deed was forged. Now it's not just me against a forger. Now it's me and a bank and a shell company and a notary all tangled up in a knot, and untangling a forged deed after the money's already gone out. The door is a nightmare that takes years and lawyers and more money than a widow on a fixed income has lying around. The forgery, I could beat, but I had to beat it before that loan closed. Once the money moved, everybody was going to be pointing at everybody else. And my husband's house was going to be sitting right in the middle of the fire. So I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I had a clock running, and I was the only one who could hear it ticking. I went home. I got out my own equipment, the loop and the good lamp I never could quite bring myself to give back when I retired. I laid the certified copy of that deed down on the desk in Emmett's study, right there next to his fountain pen, and I photographed it, and I enlarged it, and I did the same careful work on my own stolen house that I'd done for the county for 32 years. I pulled genuine samples of my own signature, my real one, off old documents, and I laid them up side by side against the fake. And every single thing my eye had told me in 3 seconds, the slow, careful work confirmed. The tremble in the A, the unnatural evenness of the pressure. Because a forger presses too careful and too steady, where a real hand speeds up and lightens as it goes. It was a forgery, and it was a provable one, and I could stand in any courtroom in this state and say so. Then I called Warren Kessler. Warren's been my lawyer for going on 20 years, a good and careful man. And when I told him what I'd found, he was quiet for a long minute, and then he said, "Adeline, we need to move on this today." And I said, "I know it, Warren. That's why I called." What Warren did that same afternoon was file a notice on the public record. In plain terms, he put the world on notice that there was a legal dispute over the title to my property, and he flagged that recorded deed as fraudulent. Now, I want you to hold on to what that little piece of paper does, because it's going to matter more than anything in about a week. A notice like that is poison to a loan. The second any bank or any title company goes to run their search before they hand over money, they hit that flag, and everything grinds to a halt. No sane lender closes a loan on a house that's got a fraud dispute sitting right on top of the title. Warren filing that notice was me quietly reaching out and putting my hand flat against the chest of whatever loan grant had coming, and stopping it cold. And he wouldn't even know what hit him until the phone rang. And here is the thing I decided, sitting in Warren's office, that I need you to understand about me before we go any further, because it's the whole reason the rest of it happened the way it did. Warren wanted to call the police that afternoon. He wanted to walk it straight over to the district attorney and the elder fraud unit and drop the whole thing in their lap. Forgery, conspiracy, financial exploitation of an older adult, the works. And it was the right call. Everything in my 32 years of training was screaming at me to do exactly that. But I told him to hold off, just for a few days. And Warren looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. Because there was one question that piece of paper couldn't answer for me, and it was the only question in the whole world I actually cared about. Grant had done this. That much I knew cold, but I did not yet know what my daughter knew. I did not know if Meredith had sat in a room and watched her husband forge her own mother's name, or if she was as blind as I'd been 11 days ago. And I could not. I would not drop a criminal case on top of my family until I had looked my only child dead in the eye and found out for myself whether she was a thief or just a fool or something sadder and more complicated than either one. And it just so happened that in 3 days, the whole family was going to be sitting around my table, in my house, for Thanksgiving. So I dried the whole thing off. I put the loop away. I put the deed in a folder in the drawer. And I decided I would go and cook that turkey and set that table and pour the wine and watch my daughter's face. And I would find out, before I let the law anywhere near her, exactly who my Meredith had become. I had no earthly idea that before the pie was even served, she was going to answer that question for me herself, in front of 16 people, without my having to ask a thing. The 3 days before Thanksgiving, I was calmer than I had any right to be. I want to try to explain that, because I think people expect a woman in my situation to be a wreck, and I wasn't. I've come to believe it's the training. When you spend 3 decades learning to sit still and look hard at an ugly thing until it gives up its secret, you don't flinch the way other folks do. The panic burns off, and what's left underneath is just work. There's a turkey to brine. There's silver to polish. There's a daughter to read. I cooked the way I always cook for that day, starting before dawn, moving through the dark kitchen by feel. And I'll be honest with you, part of me was grieving already, quietly, underneath the sage and the butter, not for the house. I knew I was going to keep the house. I was grieving for the answer I was afraid I'd get, because there are two Merediths I'd been carrying around in my head for 3 days. One of them was a woman who'd sat by and let this happen, or worse, helped. And the other was a girl, my girl, who was about to find out her husband was a criminal and have her whole shiny life come down around her ears. And God forgive me, I didn't know which one was going to walk through my door, and I didn't know which one would break my heart worse. They came in around noon on a cold, bright afternoon, the Sterling sweeping in on a draft of expensive perfume. Camille Sterling came first, in this camel-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my Honda, and she did the thing she always does, which is a slow, smiling sweep of the room, pricing it. "What a charming little house," she said, which is what Camille says instead of small. "So much character. You just don't see this kind of older construction anymore. My husband built it." I told her. "Did he?" she said, in the tone you'd use for a clever child who'd stacked some blocks. How resourceful. Grant came in behind his mother, and I made myself look at him. I'd been dreading it and craving it in equal measure. That first look, because I wanted to see if I could read anything on him. And here's what got under my skin. There was nothing. He kissed my cheek. He called me Addie. He asked if I needed help carrying anything in from the car. Warm as ever, easy as ever. This man had forged my name, was 3 days from borrowing a fortune against the house Emmett built by hand. And he stood in my front hall and asked if he could bring in the folding chairs. And I smiled and said, "Thank you. Grant, that'd be a big help." And I thought, so this is what it looks like. I'd seen the paperwork my whole career. I'd never once had it hug me in my own doorway. Then Meredith swept in, already in hostess mode, already rearranging. And I watched her like a hawk, hunting for the tell. "Mom, you didn't use the good chargers." She said not even a hello. "Oh well." And she moved my centerpiece 6 inches to the left and frowned at it. And then she picked up Emmett's fountain pen, which I'd set on the sideboard near the table the way I do every Thanksgiving, because that pen belongs at that table. And she looked at it like it was clutter. "Mom, why is this old thing out here?" she said. "We should really get you a proper set." And she went to move it to a drawer. "You put that back. Meredith Ann," I said, and something in my voice made her actually stop and look at me. "It's your father's," I said softer. "It stays where I put it." She rolled her eyes, but she set it down. And I stood there and I looked at that pen, my husband's pen, the one he signed every honest and important thing of our whole lives with, sitting 6 inches from the table. And I thought about the forged signature in the drawer in his study, and I had to turn around and go check on the gravy so nobody would see my face. But here's what I got from watching her those first 20 minutes. Nothing guilty. Meredith wasn't nervous. She wasn't avoiding my eye. She wasn't managing me. She wasn't watching Grant, and Grant wasn't watching her. If my daughter had known there was a forged deed sitting on the county records with her mother's fake signature on it, she is not that good an actress. Nobody is. Whatever else was true. Meredith was walking around my house that afternoon with absolutely no idea that anything was wrong. And that told me something, and it started, just barely, to break my heart in the second direction instead of the first. The house filled up. Cousins, an aunt, a couple of Emmett's people, and the whole thing reorganized itself around the Sterlings the way a room does around money. Conversations I wasn't in. Camille holding court about a cruise. I tried a couple of times to say something, and both times the talk just kind of closed back over the spot where I'd spoken, like water over a stone. And Meredith had taken over my kitchen, directing 2 caterers she'd hired just to make it special this year. And when I went in to check on my own gravy, she steered me out by the elbow. Mom, relax. Let us handle it. Go sit. Go sit. In my own house, on the one day of the year that has always been mine to run. So I went and sat, useless in my own living room, while strangers plated my food. And here's the moment I want you to hold on to, because it's a splinter that didn't work its way all the way in until later. At one point, Camille came and sat down next to me, close, and put her cool hand on my arm, and gave me this warm, concerned smile. Adeline, she said, quiet, just between us. You've got such a lovely home here, and it must be so much to keep up all on your own. Have you and Meredith ever talked about the two of you helping the kids get settled somewhere permanent? Grant worked so hard. It would mean the world to them to have some stability. And I remember thinking, at the time, that it was just rich lady small talk, the kind of nosy thing Camille says. I smiled and said something about how the kids would land on their feet, and she patted my arm and moved on. Tuck that away. Camille Sterling asking me, 3 days after her son forged a deed to my house, whether I was planning to help the kids get settled. We are going to come back to that. And when we do, it's going to make your skin crawl the way it eventually made mine. The only clean air in that whole house was my grandson. Silas found me on the sofa where they'd parked me, and he came and sat on the arm of the chair and showed me a robot arm he'd built for some school engineering thing. And for 10 minutes, I wasn't furniture. I was grandma. It's really something, sweetheart, I told him. And I meant it more than anything I'd said all day. You okay, Grandma? He asked me quiet, in that way kids have of seeing the thing all the adults are pretending not to see. I'm just fine, baby, I told him. I wasn't quite, but looking at his face, his grandfather's face, I felt the first real steadiness I'd felt all afternoon. Then Meredith called everybody to the table. If you have ever sat at a long table full of your own family and felt yourself slowly turning invisible, felt the conversation skip clean over you, like you're not even there, then you already know the loneliest room in the world is a crowded one. If that's landing somewhere real for you right now, stay with me. There's a reason I'm telling you every bit of this. The table seats 16, and that year, counting me, there were 17 of us. I knew it the second I walked in and saw the place settings. 16 chairs, 16 plates, and Meredith standing at the head of it, directing everybody to their spots like a wedding planner. Camille, you're up here by me. Grant, head of the table. That was Emmett's seat, but I let it go. Cousins down at that end. Silas, honey, you're up here with the grown-ups this year. On and on, placing every single body, until that long table my husband built was full, and there was no seat left with my name on it. It was not an accident. I knew my daughter. She'd counted. She'd known there'd be one too many. And somewhere in her planning she had decided, in advance, who the one too many was going to be. And Camille, ever helpful, supplied the cover, turning to me with that warm, terrible smile. Oh, is it tight? She said. You know, older folks are often more comfortable away from all the bustle anyway. The kitchen's so much cozier. Less noise for the nerves. Less noise for the nerves. Like I was 90 and fragile instead of 70, and standing in a house I owned outright, with a forged deed to that very house sitting in the drawer 12 feet away. And I'll tell you, I opened my mouth. I did. I was about to say something. Maybe just that this was my house, that I'd been up since 4, that the pen sitting 6 inches from her elbow had signed the paper the day Emmett and I burned the mortgage on this very house. But before I could get a word out, my daughter stood up. She had her wine glass in her hand, and she was glowing. This was her afternoon. Her in-laws impressed, her table beautiful, her caterer's gravy sufficiently fancy. She had the whole room's attention, and she lifted that glass. And she said, I just want to say thank you to everyone who made this house a home, to family, to new traditions. She smiled at Camille, to the next chapter for all of us, to everyone who made this house a home. I made that house a home. Me and Emmett, 45 years of exactly this day, before she was ever born and every year since. I had been up since 4 in the morning, the food she was about to praise. I had brined and basted and stirred with my own 2 hands. And in her toast to everyone who made this house a home, there was not 1 inch of room for the woman who actually, physically had. And that's when she looked at me, standing there at the edge of my own dining room with a plate in my hand because I'd been about to sit down. And she said it, bright, caring, pitched to carry. Mom, you can eat in the kitchen. The real family sits here. The real family sits here. I'm not going to describe the silence, because the silence told me everything I needed to know, and I want you to sit in it the way I had to. It was not a shocked silence. Nobody gasped. Nobody dropped a fork. 16 people heard my daughter tell her 70-year-old mother to go eat in the kitchen, in that mother's own home. And the silence that followed was just the sound of 16 people deciding, all at once, not to get involved. Camille studied her napkin. The cousins found their plates fascinating. Grant, the man who'd forged my name, looked at the tablecloth. They weren't horrified. They were a little embarrassed. The way you're embarrassed for somebody who's wandered into the wrong room. But not one of them was going to spend a nickel of their own comfort to defend me. And that silence hurt worse than the words did. The words were one woman being cruel. The silence was a verdict. 16 people quietly agreeing that, yeah, that's about the right spot for her. And then, God love him, the boy stood up. Silas shoved his chair back so hard it damn near tipped over. Grandma can have my seat, he said, and his voice cracked right in the middle of it, the way a 17-year-old's does when he's scared to death and doing the brave thing anyway. I'll eat in the kitchen. Or here, Grandma, take mine. I don't mind. I'll just, and he was already up, already pulling the chair out for me. This gangly kid in the button-down his mother made him wear. The only soul at a table of 16 grown adults who looked at what was happening and knew, all the way down in his bones, that it was wrong. For 1 second I loved that boy so much I couldn't breathe. And then Meredith killed it. Silas. Sharp. A mother's command, the kind that doesn't get argued with. Sit down. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing. Like her son's decency was the disruption. Like the only problem in that room was the one person trying to fix it. And Silas froze, half out of his chair, caught between his mother and his grandmother and the whole crushing weight of being 17 and powerless. And he looked at me with his grandfather's eyes, just begging me to tell him what to do. I couldn't let them turn that boy's one act of decency into a fight he was going to lose. So I gave him the only thing I had. I smiled at him, a real one, just for him. It's all right, sweetheart, I said, soft. Sit down. You're a good boy. The best one here. He sat slow, miserable. And I stood there and I looked one time, one long time, at the table my husband built with his hands, full of people about to eat the food I'd cooked, who had just watched my daughter send me to the kitchen and decided it was fine. And somewhere in that looking, 3 days of grieving and wondering and dreading just quietly finished itself. I had my answer about Meredith now. Not the whole of it, but enough. She hadn't forged anything. She was too comfortable, too cruel, too oblivious to be a woman hiding a crime. She didn't know what her husband had done, but she had just shown me, in front of 16 witnesses, exactly how little I was worth to her either way. And so I made my decision, right there, standing up, plate in hand. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because the temptation should have been enormous. and I honestly don't remember feeling it. What I felt was that 4 in the morning calm Emmett used to say I had. The stillness that came over me when a thing had finally, completely, gone clear. I set my plate down, not slammed, set it, gentle, on the sideboard, right next to Emmett's fountain pen, the way you set down a thing you've decided you are finished carrying. You're right, Meredith, I said. And the room went quiet in a different way, because something in my voice had changed. And even the people who hadn't been paying attention could feel it. The real family sits there, I said, and I nodded at the table. I'll get out of your way. And I turned around, and I walked out of my dining room, through the front hall, past the coats, and out the front door of the house my husband built, into the cold, bright November afternoon, without my coat, without one more word. And I left 16 people and a steaming turkey and 45 years of Thanksgivings behind me. And here is the thing I need you to understand, because it changes everything that comes next. When I walked out that door, I was not storming off. I was not running away. 3 days before, I had made a decision to hold off, to protect my daughter, to keep the law away from my family until I knew what she knew. And somewhere between that toast and that front door, I had just watched that decision die. She'd shown me who she was. She'd shown me she'd send me to the kitchen even now, even here, for no better reason than to look good in front of Camille Sterling. So I was done protecting her from what was coming. Every bit of mercy I'd been holding back for 3 days. I let it go, right there on the front step. Whatever the law was going to do to Grant, it was going to do. And I was going to make one phone call that would change where that house went forever. I got in my Honda, and through the big front window, I could see them, the warm gold light, the full table, my family just going right on with their dinner. Nobody came after me. Not Meredith, not Grant, not one cousin. 16 people, and not a single one of them followed me out into the cold to say, wait, this isn't right. Come back. Only one face was turned toward the window, watching me go. Silas. He had his hand pressed flat against the glass. I lifted my hand to him, and then I backed out of the driveway of my own house, and I drove away. I didn't go far. I couldn't have told you where I was going when I backed out of that driveway, but my hands knew, the way they knew my own signature. They took me across town to the little office I've kept since I retired. It's nothing much. One room over the top of a dry cleaner, a desk, a good lamp, a couple of filing cabinets full of old case notes I probably should have shredded years ago. When I left the county lab, I couldn't quite bring myself to walk away from the work entirely. So I kept this little space, and I take the odd private case now and then, a disputed will, a landlord who swears his tenant signed a lease. Emmett called it my hidey hole. It's the one place in the world that's just mine, that nobody in that family has ever set foot in, that Meredith doesn't even know still exists. And that's exactly why my hands drove me there. I needed to be somewhere that belonged only to me. I let myself in, and I sat down at the desk in the dark for a minute, and I waited to fall apart. It didn't come. I kept waiting for the tears, for the shaking, for the second guessing. None of it showed up. What came instead was the strangest lightness, like setting down a suitcase you've hauled so long, you forgot it even had a weight. For 10 years, I'd been carrying around the full-time job of being acceptable to my own daughter. And somewhere on the walk from that dining room to my car, I'd just set it down on the porch and left it there. I turned on the lamp. I made myself a cup of coffee from the little pot I keep, and I sat down, and I let myself think it all the way through. One time, careful, the way you hold a decision up to the light before you act on it. Because a woman who makes up her mind in the heat of an insult is a fool, and I have never once in my life been a fool. So I held it up. Was I punishing my daughter over one bad moment at a dinner table? No. I made myself be honest about that. The moment at the table wasn't the thing. The moment was just the place where I could finally see the thing. 10 years of it. The correcting, the apologizing for me, the caterer, the being steered out of my own kitchen by the elbow. And now the forged deed, and the shell company, and the loan, and a husband who did all of it while calling me Addie in my own front hall. The table wasn't one cruelty. It was the one time the whole 10 years showed its face all at once. And then I asked myself the only question that could have stopped me. Would Emmett want me to go easy on her anyway? Because she's ours. Because she's the only child we made. I sat with that one a long time, coffee going cold in my hands, because if the answer was yes, I was going to have to find a way to do it. But I knew my husband. I knew his face the way I know my own name. And Emmett was the most generous man God ever put on this earth. He'd have given a stranger the coat off his back. But he did not suffer being made a fool of, and he purely could not stand a bully. And what happened at that table today wasn't family. It was a hierarchy, with me at the bottom of it. And my daughter had just publicly confirmed which rung I stood on. Emmett built that house for a family, and the people at that table were not a family. They were an audience, and I was the help. But one of them had stood up, one boy halfway out of his chair, with his grandfather's eyes. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup in the little sink and set it upside down to dry. And I picked up the phone and I called Warren Kessler at home on Thanksgiving evening. And that good man answered on the second ring. Adeline, he said, surprised. Happy Thanksgiving. Everything all right? No, I said, but it's going to be. I need to make some changes tonight, Warren, and I don't want to wait until Monday. He didn't ask if I'd been drinking. He didn't tell me to sleep on it. He'd known me 20 years. He just said, tell me what you want. The first thing, I said, the elder fraud unit, the DA, all of it. I told you to hold off. And I'm telling you now, don't hold off anymore. First thing Monday, I want it all in front of the right people. The forgery, the notary, the shell company, all of it. And Warren said, quiet, are you sure, Adeline? Because once this goes to them, it's not yours to call back. Your son-in-law is going to be looking at real charges. I know it, I said. Do it anyway. And then I said the second thing, and my voice caught, just once, before it steadied back down into that ledger line. The trust, I said, the one that leaves the house to Meredith and Silas. I want to change it. I want the house to go to Silas. Only Silas. Warren was quiet a moment. Then he said, we can do that, and asked me how I wanted it done. And I thought about it, because this is the part I'd watched other families get wrong my whole career, and I was not going to get it wrong. Not to Meredith and Grant, I said. Not with those two able to touch it. I want it in a trust for the boy, and I want a trustee who is not either one of his parents. A bank, a professional, somebody neutral. I don't care, but not Meredith and not Grant. And I want it held for him until he's 25. He doesn't get it. And they sure as hell can't borrow against it or sell it or renovate it until that boy is a grown man old enough to know what it's worth. Emmett built that house for a family. I'm leaving it to the one persons in that family who acted like one. I can have the trust amendment drafted Monday, Warren said, gentle. And Adeline, are you all right? I will be, I said. Do me one favor. When the criminal side gets moving, let Grant find out through the proper channels. I don't want it coming from me over the phone. He's about to learn that the loan he's been chasing just died, and I'd rather he sit in that a while before he understands why. Because here's what Warren's notice had already done. Quiet in the background, while I was cooking that turkey. It had poisoned the well. Somewhere out there, Grant had a loan closing coming, and the second his title company ran their final search, they were going to hit that fraud flag sitting right on top of my property. And the whole thing was going to seize up like an engine with no oil. I hadn't done a thing today. I'd done it 3 days ago. It was just now coming due. I hung up with Warren, and I sat in the dark of my little office, and I let myself grieve, because I don't want you thinking my heart had turned to stone. It hadn't. I grieved right there at that desk, not for the house. I was keeping the house. I grieved for a picture I'd been carrying for 5 years, of a someday where I handed my daughter the keys to her father's home and watched her remember, all at once, who I was and what I'd give her. That someday was gone now. I'd been holding it like a breath, and I had to let it out. And it hurt going. but I'll tell you what I told myself. And what I'll tell you. If you've ever been the one who keeps on giving and giving to somebody who's already decided you don't count, generosity to a person who has no respect for you is not love. It's a tax. It's a bill you've agreed to pay on their bad behavior, over and over. And it never once buys you the thing you're hoping it'll buy, which is to be seen. You cannot purchase your way back into the heart of somebody who's already filed you under useless. You can only stop paying. And that night, at that desk, I finally stopped paying. Then the phone rang. I looked at it. Grant. I let it ring twice while I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and carried it back to the desk and sat down, unhurried, before I answered. There is a power in not being in a hurry. I learned that a long time ago. The person who isn't rushing is the person who already knows how the numbers come out. Adeline, he said, and his voice was not the easy, warm voice from my front hall 6 hours ago. This voice was tight and high and coming apart at the seams. Adeline, please. The title company called. They called the loan officer, and he called me, and they're saying there's some kind of fraud alert, a dispute on the house, on Ferncliff, and the closing's dead. They killed the closing, and I don't. Adeline, is that? Did you? What did you do? I took a sip of my coffee. It was good and hot. Hello, Grant, I said, calm as a Sunday. Now, why on earth would a fraud alert on my house have anything to do with a loan you're closing? And I heard it, that little silence on his end, the sound of a man realizing, all at once, exactly how much the old woman in the cardigan knows. I could hear the party still going behind him, or trying to, and under it Meredith's voice, climbing, asking who's on the phone. What's wrong? What does he mean, the closing? The whole afternoon she'd staged so carefully was coming apart in the background like a tent in a hard wind. Adeline, he said, and now there was real fear in it. I don't know what you think you've found, but we should talk about this. Okay, just you and me before anybody says anything to anybody. Can I come by tonight? No, I said, not tonight. And here's where I want to tell you what I'd figured out about my daughter, sitting in that dark office, because Grant's phone call confirmed the last piece of it, the piece that finally broke my heart clean in the second direction. Because while he was babbling on the phone, I could hear Meredith behind him, and she was not calm, and she was not covering, and she was not managing anything. She was scared and she was confused, asking him over and over what was going on. And a woman who was in on a forgery does not sound like that. She'd have known exactly what the fraud alert was. She'd have gone white and gone quiet. Instead, she sounded like a person watching the floor tilt for the very first time. So here was the shape of it, finally all the way clear. Meredith hadn't forged my name, but she wasn't clean either. And I knew it because I know how these things work. I'd have bet you anything that somewhere in the last few months, Grant had slid papers across the kitchen table at her. Refinance this. Sign here. It's just paperwork. Honey, don't worry about it. And my daughter had signed, without reading, without asking, because she wanted the life she was reaching for so badly that she'd decided not to look too hard at how her husband was paying for it. She hadn't held the pen that forged me, but she'd held plenty of pens over plenty of pages she never bothered to read. And that is its own kind of guilt. It's the guilt of a person who decided that not knowing was easier than knowing. And the cruelest part, the part I hadn't seen coming, was that Grant had cut her out too. That house wasn't going to a company they controlled together. It was going to a company that was his alone. My son-in-law hadn't just robbed me. He'd set it up so that when the smoke cleared, he'd have the house, and my daughter would have nothing but her name on a stack of papers she never read. Meredith thought she was climbing toward a life with this man. She had no idea he'd already built himself a trapdoor with her standing right on top of it. I didn't tell him any of that on the phone. I just listened to him beg for another minute. And then I said, Grant, come to the house tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, bring Meredith. And I paused, because this next part mattered, and bring Silas. I want Silas there especially. Then I hung up, and I turned the ringer off, and I did not answer the 4 more times it lit up in the dark that night. There was nothing left to say by phone that wouldn't just turn into an argument I'd be having alone in an empty room. I'd said what I had to say. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, I locked up my little office. I drove home, to my house, and I walked in through the front door I'd walked out of that afternoon. And the turkey was cold on the counter, and the caterers were long gone, and the good china was stacked in the sink for me to wash, because of course it was. And I did not wash it. I left it. I went up to my own bed, in my own house, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I slept the whole night through without waking once, because I finally knew what I was, not the woman they sent to the kitchen, the woman who'd caught it first, who'd stopped the loan, who held the pen the whole thing turned on. And in the morning, they were all going to find that out too. In the morning, I got up early, the way I always do, and I made a pot of coffee in the kitchen Emmett built. The kitchen they'd tried to send me to, like it was a punishment, and I stood there drinking it in the gray light. And I thought about how that kitchen is the warmest room in the house and always has been, and how not one of them had ever figured that out. Then I got dressed. Nothing special. A blue blouse Emmett always liked, and a little before 10, I put the folder in my purse, and I sat down in my own front room to wait for my family to come and find out who I was. I want to tell you how it felt to sit there, because it's the whole point of everything I've told you. The afternoon before, I had walked out of that house as a woman they'd waved off to the kitchen, and I was about to sit in that same room and watch them all come back in as guests in a house they'd forgotten wasn't theirs. Same house, same me. The only thing that had changed was that the quietest line at the bottom of the page had finally been read out loud. They came at 10, and they came in scared. You can always tell. Meredith first, white as a sheet, 10 years of careful composure gone right out of her, her eyes already red. Grant behind her, gray and hollow, a man who hadn't slept. And then, Lord help us all, Camille, because of course Camille had stayed the night. And of course, she wasn't about to miss this. She came in last and settled herself on the edge of my sofa with her coffee like she'd bought a ticket. And Silas hung back on the stairs, half in and half out, watching me with those eyes. A couple of the cousins had lingered too, drawn back over by the smell of a reckoning the way people are. Good, I thought. I'd wanted witnesses. The cruelty had been public. The truth was going to be public to match it. I didn't sit. I stood up in the middle of my own living room. In front of the fireplace, Emmett laid stone by stone, and I waited until the room went quiet. I want to tell you all something, I said. And I set my folder down on the mantel where they could all see it. This house, I said, is mine. Just mine. Emmett left it to me, paid off free and clear, 5 years ago, and my name, and only my name, is on the deed. I know every single one of you had quietly stopped thinking of it that way. I know it turned into the family house somewhere along the line, the place I babysit so the rest of you have somewhere to show up on holidays. But legally, and every other way that counts, it has been my house, and mine alone, for 5 years. Meredith opened her mouth. I lifted one hand, gentle, and kept going. Now, I said, Grant. And he flinched when I said his name. 11 days before Thanksgiving, a quitclaim deed was recorded down at the county, transferring this house out of my name and into a company. And I looked right at him. A company that, when I pulled the filings, turned out to be controlled by exactly one person. You. The room went dead still. Meredith's head turned toward her husband, slow like it hurt. That deed, I said, has my signature on it. Except I never signed it. I never met the notary who swore I did, a man named Dale Pruitt, who stamped his seal on a lie. And I stopped, and I let the quiet do some work. And then I said the thing none of them knew about me. You all want to know how I'm so sure I never signed it. For 32 years, I was a forensic document examiner for the county crime lab. My whole career, my entire life's work, was telling courtrooms the difference between a real signature and a forged one. I have put men in prison for exactly what is sitting in that folder on my mantel. I have never in my life watched a room change the way that one did. Camille's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Grant's face just came apart, piece by piece, as he understood. Finally, that of all the houses in Bucks County, of all the old ladies to forge, his fool of a self had picked the one woman on God's green earth who could spot it across a room. I took the enlargement out of the folder. I'd made it myself, at my own desk, the night before last, and I held it up. You want to see how I knew, I said. Look right here, at the downstroke of the A. See that little tremble, that little hitch, right there. My real hand flies through that spot. It's the most automatic thing in the world. My own name. But whoever drew this stopped to think. Right there. And a hand that stops to think leaves a shake behind. An honest signature glides. This one trembles. And it trembles in the exact spot that gives away every forger I've ever caught. I set it down on the mantel. I called my lawyer Thanksgiving night, I said. The loan you were closing. Grant, the one you were about to take out against my husband's house. It's dead. It died because 3 days before your dinner, I put a fraud notice on the title. That's why the title company called you. That's why the closing collapsed. You've been sitting there since last night trying to figure out what went wrong. And the answer is a 70-year-old woman in a cardigan beat you to the courthouse by 11 days. Meredith made a sound then, small and broken. Mom, she said. Her voice had gone high and thin, a little girl's voice. Mom, the kitchen thing. That was a joke. You're taking it so. You can't. You're being dramatic. You can't just, I already have, sweetheart, I said. I found you almost never have to raise your voice. If you actually have the thing you're talking about. And then I did the hard part. The part I'd sat with all night. I looked at my daughter, and I made myself say the whole truth, even the piece that was going to break her. Meredith, I said. He didn't sign it over to the two of you. He signed it over to a company that's his. Just his. Your name isn't anywhere on it. And I watched it land. I watched my daughter, who had spent 10 years climbing toward a life with this man, finally understand that he'd built the whole thing to leave her standing on nothing. Whatever you signed for him these last few months, honey. And I'd bet my life he slid some papers across the table and told you not to worry about them. You signed those with your eyes closed because you wanted the climb more than you wanted the truth. But this, he didn't just rob me. He robbed you. And he did it so quiet you brought his dinner to my table and called it a new chapter. She turned and looked at Grant, and I will not forget the look on her face as long as I live. It wasn't even anger yet. It was just the pure, stunned hurt of a person seeing, for the very first time, who they'd been sleeping next to. And that's when Camille Sterling stood up. She smoothed her slacks. She set her coffee cup down on my end table, careful on a coaster, because Camille has manners even at the end of the world. And she said, cool as November. Well, this all sounds like a family matter. Meredith, dear, I think we should be going. And there it was. Tuck away that little arm pat. I told you. Have you thought about helping the kids get settled? That question, 3 days after her son forged my name, had never once been small talk. Camille Sterling had known her boy was drowning. The Sterlings had cut Grant off months ago. I found this out later. Quiet the way you find these things out. Turned off the money and left him to sink or swim on his own. That's what made him desperate enough to do it. And Camille had come to my Thanksgiving to take my measure, to sit down next to me and feel out whether the old widow was good for a check that might save her son and save the family the embarrassment. She'd been fishing, and when the answer turned out to be a fraud charge instead of a bailout, she picked up her coat. The very people my daughter had sent me to the kitchen to impress could not get out of my house fast enough now that there was no money in it and no house to host their Easter in, and nothing left to be but embarrassing. Sit down, Camille, I said. I didn't even raise my voice. She sat. I watched my daughter watch it happen. I watched her understand, all in one terrible minute, that the whole reason she'd humiliated me, the entire 10-year climb toward these people, and these people were already reaching for their coats the second there was nothing left to take. Meredith had spent a decade trying to belong to a family that would drop her the instant she stopped being useful. She'd learned it, Finally, the exact same lesson I'd learned at my own table the day before, just from the other side of it. When the room had thinned out, the cousins suddenly remembering somewhere to be, Camille standing stiff by the door waiting on a son who wouldn't look at her. It was just us. The family that was left when the audience went home. Grant by the window with his head down, Meredith crying on my sofa, Silas still on the stairs, who hadn't said one word this whole time. Here's how it's going to be, I said. And I made my voice gentle now, because the hard part was done and I am not a cruel woman. I'm keeping this house. I'm living in it. Grant, the elder fraud unit has all of it as of this morning. What happens to you from here isn't up to me. It's up to the law. And you brought that on yourself the day you picked up a pen that wasn't yours. He didn't argue. There wasn't anything left in him to argue with. And I'm still your mother, Meredith, I said. That doesn't change either. I'll love you till the day I die. But I am done being the seat you assign and reassign depending on who's watching. I am done being sent to the kitchen in the house I made a family in. You'll see me when you invite me as your mother, not as a thing you tuck out of frame, so people like Camille don't see where you came from. I picked the folder up off the mantel. You don't get the version of me that buys your respect anymore, I said. That woman walked out the front door yesterday, and she is not coming back. And then I crossed the room to the stairs, and I sat down next to my grandson, who was crying too. Quiet the good boy, and I put my arm around him. You stood up, I told him, just for him. When it cost you something, you stood up. Don't you ever stop doing that, Silas. Not for the rest of your life. It's the whole ball game. It's everything. And he put his head down on my shoulder. This not-so-gangly Annie Moore boy with his grandfather's eyes. And for the first time in 2 days, in that house full of wreckage, I was completely at home. Here's how it all shook out in the weeks and months after. Because I know you don't just want the feeling, you want the ledger too. The loan never happened, obviously. It died the night the title company called Grant, and it stayed dead. But the damage he'd already done didn't just evaporate because the closing collapsed. Grant had been so far underwater by then that stopping the loan was like slamming the barn door on a horse that was already 3 counties gone. Whatever hole he'd dug. Forging my house was his last desperate shovel of dirt. And when that fell through, the whole thing came down on him. The elder fraud unit took it seriously, the way they should. Forging a deed, faking a notarization, trying to borrow a fortune against an elderly widow's paid-off home. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a stack of felonies. And Detective Ruth Mercer, the woman who caught the case, was thorough and kind and did not let it go. Dale Pruitt, the notary who stamped his seal on a lie he never watched get signed, lost his commission and caught charges of his own. And I understand he tried to say Grant told him it was all on the up and up, which is exactly what they all say. In the end, Grant took a plea. I won't pretend I know all the details of a sentence. And I won't pretend I sat in that courtroom, because I didn't. I'd spent 32 years in courtrooms. I didn't need one more to tell me how it ended. Meredith and Grant are done. That marriage did not survive finding out what he was, and what he'd built with her standing on the trapdoor. I'd like to tell you my daughter left him in a blaze of righteous fury, but the truth is messier and sadder than that, the way real things usually are. She loved the life more than she ever let herself see the man, and losing both at once, in one Thanksgiving weekend, in front of her mother, damn near broke her. The Sterlings, Camille and all of them, they cooled and then they vanished. Once there was no house on Ferncliff to host their Easter in, no bailout coming, no impressive address to fold my daughter into the family with. They found other things to do and other people to do them with. Meredith learned the hard way that folks who'll only have you for what you can give them were never really going to have you at all. I could have told her that. I'd learned it from the other side of the same lesson, the day before, at my own table, and the house stayed mine. I'm sitting in it right now, telling you this. Emmett's fountain pen is back on the desk in his study where it belongs. His reading glasses are still in the drawer by the good chair, and I changed the trust, just like I told Warren to. The house goes to Silas now, and to no one else, in a trust with a trustee who is not either one of his parents. held until that boy is 25 and old enough to understand exactly what it's worth. His father can't touch it. Nobody can touch it. Emmett built that house for a family, and I gave it to the one member of this family who ever acted like one. I won't pretend the whole thing didn't cost me. It did. I lost the easy fiction of a close family, the warm, crowded lie I'd been telling myself for 10 years. Thanksgiving the next year was smaller and quieter and a little strange, but it was honest. And honest, it turns out, is something I can actually live inside, which the old arrangement never was. Meredith and I are slow. I want to be straight with you about that, because I know the tidy version, the one where she sobs and apologizes and we hug it out and the music swells, would feel better to hear. That's not what happened. She has never quite managed to say she's sorry. Not the whole way. Not in real words. She's the kind that finds it almost physically impossible. But she came by a few weeks back, on a Sunday, and she sat at my kitchen table, the kitchen she once tried to send me to, and she didn't say much. And when I got up to clear the cups, she put her hand on my arm, just for a second, and she said, quiet, not quite meeting my eye, "I've got it, Mom. Sit." And she cleared them herself. It isn't everything. It isn't even close to everything. But a woman who once stood up at a table full of people and sent me to the kitchen, telling me to sit while she carried the cups. I'll take it. It's a start. It's her standing up an inch at a time, the way her boy stood up all at once. Because Silas, that boy is the whole reason any of this ends soft instead of hard. He comes by on Sundays still. We do the crossword. He's got a girl now, finally worked up the nerve, and he tells me about her. And on his 18th birthday, I gave him something. Not the house. He won't have that till he's 25, and I intend to make him wait every last day for it. I gave him his grandfather's fountain pen. I told him, this pen signed every honest thing your grandfather and I ever did. Our marriage license, your mother's birth certificate, the paper the day we burned the mortgage. 45 years of a man's word, all in one pen. And I want you to have it. Not because you'll need to sign anything grand, but because someday somebody is going to try to make you feel small, or make you sign something you haven't read, or send you to the kitchen in a house your love built. And when they do, I want you to remember what one honest signature is worth. He held that pen like it was made of something rarer than gold, and he said, "I'll take care of it, Grandma. All of it. I promise." And I told him, "I know you will, baby. You already proved it. You proved it for the price of one chair." He didn't fully understand what I meant. Someday he will. Someday, when he's grown, somebody will try to make him feel like furniture, and he'll remember that the smallest, most ordinary act of decency, standing up, offering your seat, refusing to look away, turned out in his grandmother's life to be worth an entire house. That's the part I hope he keeps. Not the house, the standing up. It's quiet here on Ferncliff Road now, quieter than it used to be. I get up early, the way I always have, and I make my coffee in the kitchen Emmett built, and I take it to the table, and I sit at the head of it in the gold morning light, and I drink it slow. Not because I'm fighting anybody for the seat, but because it was always mine, and I'd just forgotten for a little while to take it. For 32 years, my job was proving that a forged signature always betrays itself. It trembles in the exact place an honest hand would have glided. But no report ever let me write the truest thing I learned, which is that people forge a lot more than names. They forge warmth. They forge belonging. And the tell is always the same. It shakes right where it should flow. My daughter forged a fan for years, and I let her, because I wanted so badly to believe it was real. The house was never the thing they tried to take from me. It was the belief that being useful is the same as being loved. So keep your own name on your own life, read before you sign. And when somebody sends you to the kitchen in the home your love built, don't argue. Just go quietly find out who's really holding the pen. That's my story. One Thanksgiving, one empty chair, and a phone call I'd already made before they ever thought to make theirs. If it reminded you of a seat you've let somebody take from you, go take it back. Today, leave me a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.